Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Robertson with the 506 Investor Group. Today we have yet another of our webinars. Today we have CrowdStreet, one of the probably the most popular platform in our group, and I'm proud to introduce Darren Powderly. He is the co-founder of the company, and he is going to go over the what's going on with the company, what's going on with COVID, what the future looks like, any other questions we may have. But welcome, Darren.
Mark, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it, and welcome to all the 506 Investor Group members. We know many of you individually, and some of you we know quite well, and we just really value the partnership. So thanks again for having us. Mark and company, our goal here today is pretty clear. We want to enhance the partnership with 506 Investor Group overall, and we want to enhance the relationship with you individually as well. So that's why we reached out. We did proactively reach out to Mark about 3 or 4 weeks ago as part of our overall theme of over communicating with our investor members. And you guys, we consider you VIPs, and we want to do our very best to serve you and give you the very best experience. And so I was really pleased when Mark agreed to have us host this webinar together. And so today, what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get things started, but we've got 4 speakers today. I'll kick things off, and then I'll hand it over to John Havens, our VP of Capital Markets, and he'll hand it off to Ian Formigli, our Chief Investment Officer, who then will hand it off to Robert Stiles, our Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer, who hand it back to me for a little wrap up and some Q&A. So we're going to discuss how we source deals. And I want to set the stage a little bit here because many of you are like CrowdStreet experts, right? But we have changed quite a bit. We have evolved. We have grown and sort of become more mature, more professional in our operations and the way that we perform our business. And I think it's important to sort of revisit just some of the baseline. We're going to talk about how some of the deals are reviewed through investment committee. We're going to talk about our newer, about 9 months old now, asset performance team. Many of you, we know, are most concerned today about the performance of your prior investments, and we're here to give you a good update on that. We'll do a look ahead, and then we'll answer some of your questions. Thanks, you guys, for submitting so many questions in advance. The CrowdStreet's mission is to deliver the best online real estate investing experience, making it easy for individual investors to achieve smarter diversification. We started this business and we conceived of it in 2012. We launched it in 2014. We decided to go with a different business model. Many of you have been attracted to CrowdStreet as opposed to the dozens of other special purpose vehicle platforms that exist out there, right? You've been attracted to the direct to consumer application to real estate investing, right? You like the idea of meeting the sponsors directly through the CrowdStreet platform and the benefits that are associated with that. It's an efficient way to grow, your network of investors and hence a diversified real estate portfolio. There are limitations to our business model, although we do believe now more than ever that our direct to consumer model is a superior model, a scalable model. And we're seeing more and more quality sponsors adapt it. It was slower to start, and now it has really sort of taken off because of the benefits. We're going to talk about some of the pros and cons, or some of the benefits and perhaps some realistic limitations of what the CrowdStreet direct-to-consumer platform are. So let's, at a broad level, CrowdStreet, we like to think of our value proposition to individual investors like you guys and you all as a group, starting with, sourcing the best sponsors. Right. So again, some of this is going to be a little elementary, but we're going to get more complex because we understand that you guys you're an expert audience. You guys are our power users. You guys help us, give us feedback and make us a better platform. Hence, we want to deliver a power user or expert user experience for you. But it is important for some of you to sort of get a baseline because things have changed a lot. For instance, our capital markets team, we have offices all over the United States. We hire expert capital markets people to procure deals in the field. They hand those deals, they submit those deals, select deals that pass our ever increasing quality bar off to our investment committee, and the investments team, right, who does an extensive review, vetting the sponsor, looking at the property, looking at the deal structure. Once we go through the fundraising process on the marketplace, we close that deal is now handed off to the asset performance team. The asset performance team, as you guys know, the CrowdStreet sticks around. We stick around throughout the entire term of the investment, managed by and responsible by our sponsor, but they're reporting through the platform and to our investor members, right? We've done 25,000 tickets, if you will, or transactions on our marketplace, so over 400 plus deals. So there's a lot to monitor. And that asset performance team, while about 9 months old, is something that we wanted to invest in, coming as we matured, and we've done that, thank goodness, and it's growing, and we'll make it even better in the future. But that asset performance gives us the ability to report and feedback and become smarter investors ourselves, as well as help bring better quality sponsors and better sort of quality offerings to the marketplace for you. This is a powerful, virtuous cycle that we are running for your benefit. And the more reporting and feedback that you guys give us, one of the reasons why we're reaching out today, and we reached out and said, hey, what do you want to talk about today, is that we value your feedback. It becomes important data points for us to become a more valuable platform for you. So with that, that's my opening. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm going to hand it off to our VP of Capital Markets. John Havens is from Boston, Massachusetts, and we have expanded nationally. John joined us to lead our capital markets team. So John, why don't I hand it off to you, and you can cover that part of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Darren, and thanks to all the 506 folks out there for taking some time to meet with us. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. As Darren mentioned, I joined the firm recently, about 6 months ago in October, and come from the banking, alternative investments, pension plans. I've bounced around a lot of different corners of the capital markets and the real estate world over my few decades, and really grateful to be here at CrowdStreet. As Darren mentioned, I see this as a three-faceted approach. We generate deals, we review those deals, and then we track how they're doing. Very interconnected, very additive. It allows us to be nimble and proactive, and I think more than anything helps us to maintain that competitive dialogue as we reach out to the marketplace. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the metrics on how we get that done, the resources we apply, and some of the processes that we use, again, to find those best-in-class sponsors and those best-in-class deals. Maybe just a step backwards for just a second, just to set the baseline here. As you know, we are a tech-based, tech-enabled platform and marketplace, which is incredible for deal flow, for information flow, for analytics and process efficiency and transparency. All of those things, as Darren said, I think put us in a really great competitive space in order to bring you and people like you, investors like you, the level of deals we do. But as you also know, real estate is a local person-to-person business built on relationships and trust. And this dynamic is fostered and built beyond that tech enablement and really requires people and experience and talent and engagement. And to that end, that's what you see here on this slide, right? We've got a national team of folks. There's 18 folks in the entire group that we use to cover the country. 7 of them are what we call managing directors. Think of them as the regional CEO for the markets they cover, and we cover all major secondary, tertiary markets across the US. These folks that we've hired have local knowledge and experience. Many of them have been in these markets for years, in either the brokerage, the transaction, the lending business. We've got deep, talented pool that we use to scrub sponsors and find deals. And again, to that end, we've built this team now. I'm in Boston. We've, of course, got folks in Portland, but also Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, New York City, and we continue to grow that spread to put up the numbers you see here, tens of thousands of prospecting calls to find, those 1,000 deals or so that we screen and turn into the deals we ultimately launch on the marketplace. So while it is a volume process, it is also one rooted, again, in that outreach and engagement personally. And so, Dan, if you can flip the slide forward to slide 7. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the results. Again, those tenured and enterprise sponsors, which we see as the top tier sponsors, folks with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in assets under management. And you can see by this that these are sponsors that have entrusted us with not just 1 or 2, but in sometimes 3, 4, 5, 10 deals. And we've raised a significant amount of money for them. And so this really becomes the storyline of how do we, as a competitive player in this market, continue to press into these larger sponsors, gain their trust, and continue to develop high quality deal flow and pipeline. And so if you can flip forward a slide for me, Darren, please. This is really the progression of that in a graphic. And so if you look at the orange and kind of the pinkish colors, on the left, you see the orange is what we call tenured sponsors, and the pinkish is called enterprise. So those are our top 2 tiers, the most sophisticated, deep, national, vertically integrated, real players in the market. And you can see in 18, we had less than half of the deals we did came from that top tier. And you roll forward to 2020 and it's over 60% and growing. And I think what happens there is really a testament to these sponsors maybe trying the CrowdStreet Marketplace initially, but then building a more trusted relationship with us and using us not as a, gee, nice to have, but a real strategic option to tap the capital markets. And that's why we see those 2 segments growing, and we continue to focus on those, again, with this outreach program with our managing directors to really press into that space, because that's where you're going to find the highest quality deals, the most lucrative economics, and again, as we'll talk about in performance, the folks that can weather storms like this and really maintain the quality of their deal through sometimes challenging times. And so as I pass it over to Ian to talk more about how we vet and screen these, again, this 3-pronged approach of deal flow, quality deal flow, scale, and diversification, feathering into the investment review, which Ian will touch on, where we really focus on structure and economics and vetting of the sponsor and the deal. And then later we'll talk the performance, the due diligence, the transparency and reporting. Really puts us in a position to all learn from each other and get that flywheel effect. And so I'll let Ian walk you now through what happens once we find a deal and it gets put in-house to go through that really diligent investment review.
Great, thanks, John. Hi, everyone, this is Ian from Igley. It's great to catch up with the 506 group, and I recognize a number of the names on the call this morning. So what I will do is I'm gonna walk you through a few slides just to give you a little bit of an update in terms of what the investment screening process looks like today. I wanna give the majority of the time to some of the other stuff in the presentation, so let's just go ahead and dig in. So just a quick overview. Again, many of you understand the basics of this process. Some of you understand the process in detail. But in essence, we have kind of these 4 layers of review that we conduct. So once John's team hands off a deal, officially moves this into the screening process, it's just at the point where our team is going to pick up that deal and run through these 4 layers. Some of it is conducted linearly, and some of it is conducted concurrently. And a couple of points that I want to call out in terms of what has really evolved, I would say, over the last year and a half or so, is really on the quality control and document review processes. So today, there is a team of 14 individuals that is working on this part of the process. And there is now dedicated staff on quality control. So we have a woman who goes through every one of these deals, and she's validating and checking off third-party reports, receiving a ton of information from sponsors. I'll touch on more of that in a minute, and then handing it off through the process we go. So deals are checked and reviewed and double checked again before they're ultimately approved. The documentation review process is something that has really formalized and evolved as well over the last year or so. You know, we actually have an attorney at CrowdStreet reviewing every deal, reviewing the organizational structures. This is a person that comes out of the background, very sophisticated deal transactions person. And so making sure distribution waterfalls conform, you know, that we're looking for the key decision rights and so forth. You know, in essence, we're looking to validate that everything that was presented to us during the deal screening process in terms of the models and what we looked at in terms of the documents is really flowing through in the investor docs. So by the time that the deal gets onto the marketplace, it's been scrubbed pretty thoroughly. This next slide is just kind of walking you through that quality control checklist. So this is what we're asking for and receiving on every single deal. And like I said, it goes throughout the deal process, and some of it has to occur, through the funding process. I mean, for example, appraisals and final loan docs and things like that are happening, while we are closing the transaction, the warranty deed, settlement statement, and so forth. But we are receiving this, we're following up on this stuff, and it is getting checked off. And the team that's working on this follows up with me every step of the way as we're going through the process. The next slide is just to talk a little bit about when we're screening the deal, how we're looking at them, the tools that we're using, and what we're doing. So, right now, for example, we subscribe to RCA and CoStar. We're using that data in conjunction with our own data, which is, now growing. And now that we've done over 400 deals, we have team members on the deal team that have been, that are multi-year tenured at CrowdStreet. And what we're finding today is that, a lot of times we can bring, if a sponsor brings us deals, we've seen a deal like it, or we've done a deal in the comp set. So literally the marketplace kind of totality is really helping us day to day. As the investor manager, so an investment manager and an analyst are essentially teamed up on a single deal review process as they go through that deal and then are validating and getting to the point where they think this is eligible for the marketplace. It's at that point that they're going to prepare an investment memo. It's usually about 50 slides or so, and that's brought into a formal deal screening process that is conducted multiple times per week. I lead that process, still have final say over what goes up and does not go up on the marketplace. Typically speaking, when a deal is brought through memo, there's going to be a number of follow-up items. In essence, we're going to distill that deal down to, call it 5 to 10 kind of key data points to go out and double, triple check, and also follow up and get more information. If we can get through those, then that's when we're going to see the deal circle back around. If the information is good, that's how we're going to see that deal get approved, subject to documentation review. And if those follow-up questions turn into things that are exposing the weak points in the deal, it's at that point again that what looks like a good deal that we would theoretically approve as ultimately gets denied. So let's go on to the next step. So one thing that I wanted to take some time to talk about is to really kind of just make sure that everyone on the call understands that really what we're driving towards is net to investor improved outcomes. And I view that in two aspects. The first is improved economics. I put 90+% because I'm sure there's some deals that we must have done over the time that, more or less we approved the terms coming in. Honestly, I can't remember a single one over the last year that we weren't able to improve net to investor returns from when it showed up to when it went onto the marketplace. And it's important to say that is inclusive of any fees that we stick into the deal. Bottom line is I'm feeling like that we've reached a point in our life cycle. We funded over $500 million last year. We were on track to do, we came out of the gate strong this year. We've reached a point where the amount of funding velocity and demand on the marketplace, the sponsors understand it, and they're willing to negotiate terms with us, and they want to be successful. And by successful oftentimes means they want to raise, $7, $10, $12, $15 million these days. And they know they're going to have to give, nearly basically institutional level returns, probably not quite institutional, but close, in order to get there. So on a deal by deal basis, they show up with a structure, we coach them and guide them towards, how they might actually perform on the marketplace. And we're basically driving down what I look at it from is the perspective of every deal starts off with a project level return and a presented investor level return. And then we're going to basically look to crush that spread. The other important thing to talk about is that, we are also practically in almost every single deal, I would say, again, I can't remember one in recent history that wasn't the case, where we're tempering the expectations. Sponsors are really excited about their deal. They think it's the best thing that they've ever done, and they think they're going to knock it out of the park on every one. We have the benefit now of seeing dozens to tens of dozens of these deals in the actual marketplace, their comps, and we know what's realistic. And so we are pushing back on those assumptions. And in most of all the cases, what we see as a project level return that shows up, we're taking that down. We are reducing rent growth, assumptions. We're increasing expense assumptions. We're basically bringing the deal back into rationality. Every now and then we get a deal that shows up and has really great underwriting assumptions. Those are obviously the enterprise groups would be a good example of that in the highly tenured ones. But other than that, we're basically going back and kind of taking a cut at the assumptions. These are just a few of the examples of what we have actually been able to do on existing and an upcoming deal, just to give you a feel for when we say that we're improving returns, we really are. And so I think moving on, I think that's then the last thing is just to talk about today the environment that we're in. If there was a deal that was in existence prior to March 12th, which I think is the day, March 12th or March 13th was the day that WHO labeled COVID a world pandemic, we're going to need to see updated assumptions, to reflect the new environment versus the old. This example here is from the Maker Brothers deal in terms of this deal was in existence before. So, when we revisited the deal, we said, look, we really like this deal. Ultimately, we think this is a strong asset, but we also need to see moderated expectations because we can't assume that this hasn't happened because COVID has. And so this is just giving an example of how the deal was more or less kind of buttoned up a little bit more. It was stressed a little bit more. And, to have a deal then with a 5.25 exit cap when, prior to COVID, the latest comps were showing deals exiting at kind of mid to low 4 caps on brand new, ground up in Austin, we felt was overall, good underwriting assumptions. And other than that, when we think about a existing to post-COVID environment, last point, I'm going to talk about this one, is that, in anything that shows up now, we're basically looking for those, those assumptions that are reflective of the current environment, right? 0% rent growth for the first years, higher exit caps, higher bad debt, all those kinds of things, they need to be baked into the equation. So let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Darren. And in terms of a couple tools that are available for your use that are relatively new, the first is the CrowdStreet Review Snapshot. This came up because we had just we wanted to provide investors with a checklist of things that the investments team is looking for day in, day out when we're screening deals. These are objective checklists. So we said, is there something we can put in the hands of the investor that is an objective term, not necessarily, we use these numbers, right? So we have differing opinions on them on a deal by deal basis. But in essence, if we could create kind of an over-under of what would really drive value for the investors, and note that if it hits above or better than this threshold, let's put a check mark by it. It'll give you the ability to kind of quickly assess the things that we know you're looking for in terms of the sponsor co-invest, the leverage on the deal, and so forth. So we now have that right at the top of the page as you dig in. And the last thing I want to call out is that because we are in this fast-moving, rapidly evolving environment, the marketing team has helped us put together this COVID-19 market volatility page. You can access it from the homepage on the website. And so we now have people like Darren and Brent Heigelke, our CMO, and me out there talking to various people around the country to give you live perspectives in real time each week. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's worthwhile. There's always fresh content in there and some great data points for the market. And so I think with that, that's going to wrap it up for the portion of my presentation. I'm going to pass it over to Robert to talk about asset performance.
Great, thanks, Dean, and thanks to everyone for taking your time today. So wanted to remind everyone, we launched asset performance in July 2019. So we're about 10 months into this endeavor. And we specifically don't call this an asset management team. Given our direct-to-consumer model, our role is to not directly manage the assets. Instead, we work really hard through the sponsors to try and get to the best answer possible for our investors. So with that, let's go a little bit deeper into the goals for the asset performance team. Working with others in CrowdStreet, including sponsor relations and investor relations and various teams that report to the individuals who are talking to you on this call, our primary goal is to facilitate a strong marketplace. An asset performance role in creating the strong marketplace includes a couple different steps. One, reviewing information provided by sponsors to ensure it's accurate. So when we launched the team in July, we had to play catch up, and we had to go through all the historical reporting for deals since the very beginning of time. Today, as financial information comes in on every single deal, we are real-time reviewing that information, checking it for accuracy, providing feedback to the sponsors, so on and so forth. Another thing that we're doing is we're comparing most recent projections to the original projections. And I'll talk more about what we're going to do with that and how we're going to provide that information to out here in a little bit. And then one thing that is not seen, but we do on a very regular basis, is enter into discussions with sponsors whenever there is something noted as far as a change in plans, or, so if they're changing their debt structure, if they're changing construction plans, or if those construction timelines move out. We're constantly calling those sponsors, trying to understand what's happening, trying to make sure that they're including the interest of our investors in those decision-making, and also that they're being transparent as to why they're doing those items. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes aspects like that happens. Continuous feedback is extremely important, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And because our approach is to work with the sponsors behind the scenes, many of the improvements and many of the things that Asset Performance has done today has been less visible to investors, but we're also going to work on that in the future. So another point, another goal for Asset Performance is transparency. Transparency is key. I beat that drum all the time with my teams. We beat it with the sponsors. We constantly remind them of this. A good example of this is when COVID-19 was emerging, we almost immediately, same week that it became a pandemic, sent out to sponsors a best practice notification with, I think, 10 to 12 items on there as far as how to respond to investors during this time. And one of the big things we indicated on there was that quarterly reporting isn't enough anymore. You need to move to monthly reporting, and you need to get better data. And we're happy to know that the vast majority of sponsors have stepped up, and we continue to work with them and give them best practice and best ideas there. And we're starting to use more and more data. As I talked about, we had to go through all this historical data that we've had on our platform and find a better way of utilizing that. We're also starting to talk about big data more. And we're right now in the process of standing up an internal data warehouse that will have both this internal and available external data on it. And this data warehouse will be used throughout the entire cycle by investments, ourselves, our sponsor relations teams, investor relations teams, and the like. So with that, let's move to the next slide and talk about initial areas of focus. Our first area of focus was reviewing existing assets. We set the priority on evaluating those deals utilizing the following metrics. First, we went after poor performing deals, those that were behind their original projections, significantly behind their original projections. Second, the sponsors with the most investor complaints, even if they were hitting projections or something that you guys are very keenly aware and very good at reviewing. So if there's complaints out there that typically indicate there was some sort of issue. And so we looked at those next, and then we looked at deals as they came onto the platform. So in other words, the longer they were on the platform, the greater chance they had to be reviewed. Just prior to switching gears for COVID-19, we had reviewed over 80% of the deals, and provided significant feedback to sponsors through that process. One of the most visible things for investors to date has been the repeat sponsor page, which we launched a couple months ago. We continue to work with sponsors on evaluating the advertising rules for platforms like ours, and intend to continue to enhance this page. But I know that this page has been well received by many investors, and it's just one of several things that we have in the pipeline coming up. We do a lot of best practices with our sponsors, right from the initial launch that we do, kickoff meeting with them, to offer detailed page improvements. Webinars is a great example. We shared with them best webinars and example videos. We have done more webinars on underperforming assets than ever before. We do dry runs with the sponsors prior to webinars to make sure that they're prepared. And then we're also surveying investors after the webinars to see how we can continue to improve that process. And an item coming up that put under best practices, we're in the process of creating FAQs. So in the future, when you want to launch a deal on the platform, there's going to be an FAQ process that goes with that deal. Finally, with respect to improved financial reporting, we have noted more accurate reporting by sponsors because they know they're being watched, and they've commented that to us ever since we've launched this asset performance page. Still have more to do there, but it is definitely something that we've been focused on. So with that, let's talk about what's changed so far. More timely and relevant updates. And the other thing I would say is that the updates have been more consistent. So in other words, peer pressure works, and we show these best practices to sponsors, and sponsors are updating their communications. They're being more consistent about it from a timing perspective. They're being more consistent about sharing industry relevant information. And in several cases, we were also able to get sponsors to re-engage with investors who had gone quiet. Fully admit that there's more to do here, but definitely recognize that there's been improvements. As far as holding sponsors more accountable, as mentioned previously, they know they're being watched. I meet with the sponsors regularly, as does many members of our team, and that is something that comes up. Whenever we have a visit with them, we go through our asset performance process and get feedback from them as well. And there's a whole range of emotions that we get from the sponsors, but the key is that they know they're being watched, and they know that someone is going through their information and making sure it's accurate, timely, and relevant. On the positive side, we have several sponsors that are now reaching out to us proactively and asking for help from our asset performance team and more around this best practice. Darren talked previously about the virtuous cycle. That's fully in operation, or everything that our asset performance team learns is fed back to principally our investments team. But also, as an example, we recently enhanced Salesforce instance for capital markets, so that when those individuals are going out, the capital markets team is going out to these sponsors, they know exactly how well the sponsor is doing with respect to compliance matters. Right up front, it doesn't come out at the end. All of that information is right there, so that, again, it's a virtuous cycle in everything we're learning. Enhanced reporting, we first focused on CSPB and PMA reporting, and they get regular updates from asset performance. It's basically a one-pager of here's the deal, and here's kind of some highlights on what our asset performance team thinks. That is all done outside the platform today, which is why we have not launched it to the broader audience, but we have been working with the product and development team to have the ability to deliver this much more significantly over the platform and therefore to every asset. So with that, that's a good segue into what is coming next. So one thing that was in process that got accelerated as a result of COVID-19 is we've been working on an asset performance assessment score. So this takes an internal risk score that we've been utilizing to review investments and allows us to take into consideration current events and also stress testing and things of that nature. So that instead of just reviewing assets based upon when they came into the platform or investor complaints or things of that nature, we can be much more proactive at looking at what assets we should be investing or what assets will most likely have issues going forward, and getting out in front of those sponsors and understanding what their plans are and how they're communicating those to investors. Another thing that was accelerated due to COVID is we just kicked off in April sponsor surveys. So, a lot of the financial reporting and the risk matrix and all can be backwards looking, and we wanted to make sure that we got out in front of that. We got leading indicators. So we created fairly short, quick to respond surveys that are based upon industry types. So there's over 10 different types of surveys. It looks at to whether the asset's under development or whether it's operating. And we're asking sponsors to fill these out on a monthly basis, and we're taking into consideration that data as well and utilizing that as part of our data analysis. All of this, what we're learning in the sponsor data, the internal data, eventually the big data, is going to be built into these asset-specific pages. So as I said, we've been working with product and development. We're adding a lot of new fields to be able to deliver this. We're adding a new page to the investor room. And this is not coming 6 months from now. This should actually launch in the next month or two. We're very close in the process of testing that. I do want to say this will be a version 1. And we already have a bunch of enhancements noted that we want to make to these pages, but happy to also get investor feedback as we continue to build out that process. The final thing we're doing is we're testing, as mentioned previously, we're testing big data. So we're first utilizing that internally as part of the process, but eventually, again, looking to see how we can improve the investor experience and improve these asset performance pages and other information that we'll provide to investors. So with that, I would like to send it back to Darren.
Wonderful, thank you, Robert. We'll wrap it up here. So continuously focusing on this virtuous cycle, right? Becoming better investors by leveraging all the steps in our process, and most importantly, communicating with our investors individually and collectively, and making sure that we're providing the best experience possible for you. So hopefully some of the information that we covered with you today is new, advanced, and on top of building off of your baseline education of what CrowdStreet is. I'd like to wrap up with just a few comments about, we're absolutely committed to communications, transparency, and now asset performance. Right? We want to continue to educate, you and ourselves through collaborating with industry leaders. Last week, if you haven't seen this, last week we did a webinar with the Wall Street Journal and Nuveen being one of the largest asset management firms in the world. And we did that because, we're talking with Nuveen in particular about, where they see opportunities. And, they're an example of, although they're not on the marketplace yet, they are keen to understand what we're doing. So we have a relationship with Nuveen. And when you have some of the largest asset management firms in the world paying attention, communicating with, and co-presenting with us on their view of the world plus our view of the world, that is a testament to the increased quality of sponsorships that you can find and expect on the CrowdStreet Marketplace. Again, one of the main values of our partnership between the 506 Group and CrowdStreet. Our quality control will continue to become more advanced or more strict, right? Sponsor vetting, Ian went through specifically what we go through, not only at the sponsor vetting, but also in terms of like deal structure, right? Net benefit to 506 Group investors is higher returns, right? With CrowdStreet, because of all that behind the scenes, deal structuring and expertise happening. The marketplace is going to, we're currently in a low volume environment by design. We specifically decided to reduce the number of deals that you see on the marketplace from about 3 per week, which is what we were teed up to do and actually, doing for the first couple of months of 2020. We've now dropped that in half to 1.5 deals per week, right? And that is because we want to pay more attention to fewer and higher quality and sort of market appropriate, right? Timing appropriate deals that will be met with demand, right? Matching your demand with the supply on the marketplace is the goal. And then to do so in a more sort of thoughtful, approach given where we are in the market. Now, that'll probably be for the next 60 or 90 days. And we anticipate that after that, the deal flow will start to increase, right? As America reopens and restarts, our economy restarts, right? Deals will take a while to transact. Deals take a while to transact, and deal flow today is basically, shut down because mostly, not entirely, but largely shut down because equity providers can't travel and so on and so forth. Overall general immobility. So we expect deal flow to start to pick up, and we expect that deal flow to look, as Ian mentioned, sort of post-COVID underwritten, appropriate for the marketplace. So we'll be focusing on, post-COVID type of deals. All the while, this is a great time for CrowdStreet while we're not, working overtime every single day with transactions. It's a time for us to improve our technology, a time for us to further improve the user experience and the user interface. And you'll be seeing some nice advancements come out. Our technology team led by Londa, who is our Chief Technology Officer, has made some tremendous improvements. And we're excited about, the performance of the technology and the experience in the technology. Robert mentioned big data and data analytics. It's kind of a, important part of the future of CrowdStreet as a technology platform, leveraging data and big data, both our own and the third party, and we'll use that and share that with you guys so that you can make better informed investment decisions. So with that, I want to thank you everyone again for joining us. You guys submitted a lot of great questions. We're happy to address some of those questions right now, and the questions we're unable to address, we will get to after the fact, and Mark and I will communicate on that. So Mark, I'll hand it back to you for some questions.
Very good. Appreciate it. That was very informative. I guess my first question is one I probably think is the most important that we can get out of this is managing investors or particular group members' expectations on what you can and will do after the fact. So now that a bunch of deals are going full cycle, some sponsor deals aren't going that great. And I hear a lot of chatter within the forum that CrowdStreet should do this or shouldn't do that. So can you tell specifically what you can or are willing to do and what is not in your privy to do going forward on sponsors, as far as, you know, potentially, I mean, what can and can't you do is in tracking down a deal that's not doing well?
Yeah, let me take a first crack at that. So it goes back to our business model, right? Direct to consumer is something that I think the 506 group embraced, right? We want that transparency, the ability to sign the documents of the sponsor, right? CrowdStreet is a matchmaker if you really simplify what we do, right? And so the benefit of our platform also presents some of the limitations of our power, right? If we had an SPV platform like some of the others that you guys have participated on, sure, you know, then we're the sponsor, we're the issuer, and we can exhibit a higher level of control. The reality of the direct-to-consumer CrowdStreet Marketplace business model is that we do have limited control, but the individual investors who go directly to our sponsors, you know, we are all relying on that sponsor to be a fiduciary, an excellent operator, and look out for the best interest of the investors. And when those deals are underperforming, then we can, you know, help through communications and that peer pressure that Robert had explained. I'm going to hand it off to Robert to sort of complete. But, you know, what we're unable to do is sort of band everyone together and start suing sponsors and so forth, right? There are real limitations there based upon the reality of our business model. But we are very much interested in protecting the best interest of our investors every step of the way.
So
yeah, I would add,
go ahead.
I would add a couple of things. Sorry, Mike. One, as Darren mentioned, we work behind the scenes with sponsors to do what we can. Two, we're willing to help investors organize. So we've had several cases where, particularly if our investors are, you know, a sizable piece of the equity, we've helped them organize and helped them, you know, communicate with each other. We have to be careful of privacy laws there, but once the permission is granted, we get involved in that process, and I've had conversations with them with respect to their operating agreements, things of that nature. And then they're really the primary things we can do at this point in time. I would say the third point, the other thing is we don't tend to be active because at the end of the day also, we're not a party to the operating agreement, and we're not trying to make the returns any worse. If we were to sue the sponsor or things of that nature, we don't really have the right to do that. We have arbitration rights in some cases, but all we would do is increase additional expenses against that sponsor, and we'd rather have that be handled by the investors.
All right, specifically Nicholas, Spillman, Alpha, Encore, there's quite a few sponsors that get a lot of chatter in our group. What can you do as far as pressure, or specifically what can and can't you do with those kinds of sponsors? I mean, what should we expect and not expect?
So Alpha is a great example where we've been working with a group of investors that decided to band together, and we have been helping them with the communications. We've been sharing with them the documentation we can as far as all the communications that we've had with Alpha, so that as they've done further communications to Attorney General and other parties to try and get Steve Ivankovich in that case to respond. So we're there in a support role, I would say, with the investors is the best that we can do. On Nicholas Residential, I know Ian's team, I'll let him speak to it, rewrote the entire underwriting for some of his properties. We contacted the sponsor and gave them our recommendations as to what should be done with certain properties. We've worked very hard with them on making sure that they've updated the reporting, and that they are one sponsor where the reporting was not accurate. We've gotten that reporting accurate. So they're just some examples. Ian, I don't know if you want to add something here.
Sure. Yeah, and just quick clarification, right? So in the case of Steve Ivankovich, right, we're talking about Atlas and, you know, and Alpha. I know there's been a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of frustration in terms of Jide, his communication style, and what he's, you know, been willing to do or not do. You know, I think in the case of Alpha, there's, you know, I think if you look at all of the somewhat problem sponsors that have come and gone off our marketplace over the years, I think there's some optimism there. I think he really wants to try, like he needs to probably understand better. We continue to work with him. He's very open and continues to take our feedback. And then on some of the other ones, we just kind of like pound away. We let him know, you know, what we think Obviously, at the end of the day, the ultimate leverage, to the extent that it matters, is their ability to come back to the marketplace, right? That is one of the things that's in our control. So, for example, you haven't seen those sponsors come back to the marketplace in a long time, and I can tell you that a lot of them would like to come back to the marketplace, but there's just still, we got to see a lot more. We have to see outcomes that are much better than they are today, if that were ever to become the case. And until that happens, then they're not going to show back up, and we're going to continue to work with investors to keep their feet to the fire.
All right, and then the next question is about fees. I mean, I think originally 2014-15, when I started looking at these platforms, the listing fees were in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. I think it's gone up, 50, 60, 70 now. And A, is that the case? And then B, it was always the assumption of a lot of investors that the listing fee was paid by the sponsor, but for the most part, I think it's baked into the deal. And so, can you kind of go over how the fees, if they've gone up, and then two, do sponsors pay the fees, or ultimately the investor pays them?
Sure, this is Darren. I'll take that one.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So our fees since 2017 have remained the same. We implemented a flat per investor technology fee, and while it does tier a little bit, it's basically flat. Like, so if an investor invests 25 grand or 125 grand, that fee remains flat, and it's paid upfront. Well, actually, there's a prepayment about 15K typically. Like, that's the sort of onboarding fee, and it's non-refundable but applicable to the final fundraising fee, which we call the deployment fee. And those fees generally, when you do the math and you sort of equate them, even though they are flat fees, range from 2.5, 3.5 points, right? So sometimes lower, sometimes higher. It is paid by the sponsor. And the sponsor pays, because as you guys know, as investors in these single assets on the marketplace, there are no fees to you. So we are in business as a profit, driven company. And we believe we provide a lot of value. We believe that our fees are within the market for equity, especially equity that can come from individual investors at scale, right? So we have studied these fees a lot. Of course, we feel like they're competitive. They are paid by the sponsor. More often than not, they are baked into the deal. Occasionally, they pay for them out of their corporate budgets, but more often than not, they're baked into the deal. 100% of the time, those fees are represented in the deal, right? When they are part of the deal, you will find them in the sources and uses, right? When we underwrite a deal, if it's not apparent, we basically say, where are our fees in this deal, right? Are all fees incorporated into the financial model? So when you see a deal on the CrowdStreet Marketplace, if the sponsor is putting any fees of CrowdStreet along with any other fees, right? We're a teeny line item in the grand scheme of things, but all fees, right? That's the point, including our fee. And so the deals you will find them including all fees, including ours. And then on an ongoing basis, there is an investor management fee on an annual basis thereafter. Much smaller percentage of that, but that keeps us engaged with the sponsor so that we can provide regular investor communications and reporting services. And it's also a value to the sponsor as well, because we with the technology plus our IR team, we're providing that additional service. So yeah, I know that there were some questions about that, but just over the last few days, in fact, and by all means, we have been transparent, and I think it's a point of clarification rather than anything else.
But they have changed since the early days. 2014-15, was it not just a flat fee, a listing fee?
Oh yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this presentation, Mark. So much has changed. In 2014, we launched. We had a flat fee. It was whatever we could get at the time, because we were raising like 200K, 500K. We were doing everything manual behind the scenes. So 6 years later, And actually 3 years after we launched, we did update the fee schedule. So that has been proven out since 2017, where we've experienced most of our growth. That fee structure changed.
Right, and also the question of exclusivity. I think some deals that once an investor invests through your platform with the sponsor, then they have to use the platform going forward. Is that true? And I would guess have a follow-up question if it is.
Absolutely true. Yes, we are in the business of creating relationships, and that last. And so, as you can imagine, selling away our sponsors either through investor-driven and circumvention, or selling away our investor members through sponsor-driven circumvention is not a business that's going to last. So it's not what we do. And the way that we, so there's policies, right? The terms of service for the investors, as well as the marketplace services agreement for the sponsors. We make that very clear up front. We always communicate that, and the sponsors understand. They're like, yeah, I get it. This makes sense. It's not taking a check from JP Morgan where we can go back to JP Morgan after 2 or 3 times, right? And we really have kind of enforced this, if you will, through better levels of service, higher levels of service. So both the sponsors are like, yeah, I mean, I could circumvent you, I guess, even though it's against the rules. I might try, right? You're going to get kicked off if you do, but I might try to get away with it and ask for a forgiveness letter. But the reality is, over time, they've just said, like, well, why would I do that? That's just like biting the hand that feeds me. Not very smart. And so we've really enforced it through better service and a better experience for both individual investors and the sponsors.
But I guess it goes back to probably one of our most popular sponsors, I think, was listed on a platform 2014, MLG, and they haven't listed on a platform since. But we've invested directly with them, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 million dollars. Would that not be possible going forward if a sponsor was with you and then 10 of us invested and then they didn't list with you and they had deals going forward? We can't invest with them. We'd have to somehow funnel it through you. I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, sure. And just out of clarity, I think the MLG was with a different platform.
Oh,
but
yeah.
The point is still.
I don't think you used to be exclusive either, to my knowledge. Maybe you were in 2014, 15. I don't think you were, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, so exclusivity is something that we learned about, over the first, say, 2 years of operating the platform. And you have our deal go up on CrowdStreet, deal go up on some other platforms with different terms, right? Ian already made it very clear, in his presentation that we work very hard to improve, net to investor deal structure terms. Well, if those terms are different or not as investor friendly on another platform, it creates mass confusion. The other thing is it's really hard for a sponsor to manage CrowdStreet, right? Because of, and all the investors and the process that we're going through, never mind managing too. So we did move toward an exclusive policy, probably in 2017, 2018, and that's worked out just fine. We didn't mind necessarily competing, but the attention to detail has proven to be a benefit for everybody from the sponsor standpoint. Back to back to what we call basically non-circumvention and solicitation of future offerings. When 2014 and 2015, it was a long time ago. We did have the policy back then, but we didn't enforce it as much. But today, we're very clear and happy to have as many conversations as possible. Like if you meet a sponsor via the CrowdStreet Marketplace, it's kind of a professional courtesy and a policy that we do enforce that, you don't circumvent us, in the future, right? So,
yeah, I mean, our policy,
again, not much of a business model.
We don't reach out and don't go direct. Definitely, if it's on your platform, we don't do that. But if MLG or whoever has a deal a year down the road and that's not listed, we feel like there's not a reason not to reach out to them and invest directly with them. Is that prohibited? I mean, it almost penalizes us if we can't invest with them in the future. If they're not listed with you, then it almost says we can't invest with them. I mean, are you saying that all, ABC company has to list every deal with you going forward?
We actually have, so the sponsors get it, right? The sponsors do understand the policy. If we decline deals, or let's say we move away from hospitality because it's COVID-19 and we don't see demand for hospitality, you know, we'll work with that sponsor. Some of this comes down to like to do what's right, you know, and for your constituents, right? In this case, if we had a sponsor come to us, and we have some amazing hospitality sponsors who are going through a really tough time right now, we might not be able to accept their deal, but, you know, we'll have a conversation with them. Because can we go back to some of the investors that we like, yeah, actually we can help with that, right? So there's certainly, you know, exceptions to the policy that makes sense for both investors and sponsors. Yeah, so I think that's the.
But
the
is the
general
expectation
feeling as
that
well.
once someone's listed a deal with you, that they'll list all deals with you?
Well, the expectation is that once they list a deal with us and they meet, you know, hundreds of our investor members, that in order to you know, promote and market that deal to our investor members in the future, they will come through the CrowdStreet Marketplace. That is a very clear expectation. That's correct.
Okay. And there's a question about your managed accounts and blended portfolio. How can we ensure there's a level playing field as far as, you know, the quality deals? How do you allocate between retail and then your own portfolios, et cetera? How does that work?
Yeah, Mark, this is Ian. I'll jump in and answer that one because I get asked that question a lot. So a couple ways. First, CrowdStreet has a global allocation policy that we have drafted and we use on a day-to-day basis that ensures that direct marketplace users are always going to get, you know, a fair shake in the deal. We've never come close to even approaching. I think there was one deal that I think that we had to make sure that we carved off enough allocation for direct marketplace users, and it was $1 million allocation in a 506 in a private 506B deal. Absent that, you know, the direct marketplace users are getting on average 85, 90%, sometimes over 90% of the entire equity allocation. And where our products are coming in and chipping in, you know, I think about it these days, an average allocation out of one of our blended portfolios is going to be, you know, $250,000, $300,000 per portfolio when we're investing, when we might see that deal attract $12, $13, $14 million. So, you know, it's the other 11.7 to $12.7 million that's coming from, you know, the direct marketplace users in that case. So that we have a global allocation policy in a nutshell, and we haven't bumped up against really hitting it on any particular deals yet. And before we jump to the next question, I did want to have one follow-up communication to clear, you know, kind of clear the air a little bit on a couple of things. In terms of fees, Mark, you're correct. Fees change from flat to a variable fee, you know, somewhere, what was it, 2017 or so. What has happened though is if you go back and look at percentage fee as a percentage of the capital raise and the CrowdStreet percentage in the deal, that's gone down over time. In the early days, you would see that fee typically look like 4 or 5% of the capital in the deal. You know, today it looks more like in the 2s, below 2 in some instances. So I think if investors are thinking about it that way, like really the bottom line is like, are the fees as a percentage of the capital going up as a percentage of the capital raised? The answer is no, it's going down. Absolute fees go up because our participation in these deals does look more like, you know, $8 to $10 million these days versus $1 to $2 million in years past. The other thing I want to make sure that everyone understands is that, you know, we always seek to try to put transparency into our fees in the deal. They're always in the sources and uses. In instances, there was an example recently where they were called out as an IT fee, not specifically called out as a CrowdStreet fee. That's going to be the preference of the sponsor. That's a fee that's in the deal, and they've made that decision to put that on the sources and uses. We can't exert force over, like we will recommend to say, hey, we're fine putting our fee on the page. We know investors like it. If the sensitivity is more of like, hey, but remember, this is the fees. I don't break them out exactly, you know, line item by line item because they're fees in the deal. Then that's going to be ultimately at the sponsor discretion. And so, kind of to the point of when we think about, we always try to make a deal on the CrowdStreet Marketplace that it should be, the investor should be really agnostic as to whether they're investing through the marketplace or going direct, because those fees, for example, are in the deal. And if you go to direct, they're in the deal. Like you'll get you get the same kind of like there shouldn't be a scenario where going through a CrowdStreet Marketplace gives you an inferior net to investor return as going to the sponsor directly. That's one thing that we always look at on every single deal we do. And in the caveat saying that if you call up an investor or a sponsor and say, I'm willing to put $3 million in your deal if you give me some specific terms that are better than what I've seen on the street, okay, well then those are the scenarios I can't control. But for the most part, day to day, we are basically making sure that fees are same no matter what channel you go through.
All right. And then the next question is about COVID-19. I mean, exactly what is the strategy, short term? I mean, how do you underwrite deals with there's so much uncertainty? Personally, I can't look at a deal because I have no idea if it's going to get better in 6 months or going into the worst depression of all time. I mean, how are you guys trying to figure out how to evaluate the market?
Yeah, sure, Mark. It's a good question, and I would say that right now, I think a couple of different ways. Take, for example, the Maker Brothers deal, right? If you have a ground-up development deal, you have a deal that's not going to deliver for, another 18 months or so. And so even in a pretty severe recession, we should, by 18 months from now, we should probably see the beginning of a new cycle by that point. And so the way I look at it is, in that kind of scenario, we're making the best decisions that we can possible, all things considered, and layering in, the ability to see a lot more pain before things get any better. And then if the deal looks compelling, and again, that's the part where it's somewhat subjective, but it has to look compelling. That's the point at which we think it would make sense to come out today. Another example would be like the renal care deal that we posted recently with Ridgeline. In that scenario, you have a tenant that's basically, they're bordering on credit, right? They're $1 billion plus publicly traded company, and they're 100% leased assets with term. So weighted average lease term from credit tenants that we have high confidence are going to be able to pay the rent, even in today's scenario, even if the recession looks worse than 2008, 2009. Those are scenarios that we're looking for as well. And the last thing on this note is that, I think one thing I look at is there's a lot of sophisticated investors out there in the world. I think Barry Sternlicht is one of those. I don't claim to think that I am anywhere near as good as he is. Barry Sternlicht's out there buying right now too. So that gave us kind of like more confidence that there's going to be some deals that are going to make sense. If Barry Sternlicht's willing to buy a deal for the Starwood portfolio, he toured properties last week looking for deals. Then I'm going to say there's going to be some deals out there that we're going to be able to get to. As Darren mentioned, it's going to be a lot fewer than it would have been, if COVID hadn't happened. It's going to take turning over a lot of rocks to get to a handful of deals, but we're committed to doing it.
All right, there's a question about doing monthly webinars for underperforming sponsors. Is that something that you're willing to do or would do, like Nicholas, Alpha, et cetera?
This is Robert. What we try and do is when there's material information to provide, if there's enough information on a monthly basis, sure, we're willing to push the sponsor for monthly webinars, but it's all going to depend upon the amount of new information and the best way to deliver that. Surely we want them to do monthly financial report updating, particularly during these times, but we just want to make sure there's enough valid information to get back out to investors.
And I guess there's another question for later, but as far as reporting goes, some have much better reporting, communicate much better. Are there any kind of requirements you can put in up front that they have to do a certain standard of reporting under a certain timetable before you'll list them? I mean, I think that reporting is all over the gamut right now, and if we could ensure that we have decent reporting going forward with new sponsors, I think it would help everyone.
So that is something where we have improved our contracts with the sponsors over time. So if you look back 2 years ago and what was required on the reporting versus today, it is enhanced. Having said that, it's an area that we're right now looking at again and seeing if we can make further enhancements, particularly given all of these new features and functionalities that we want to roll out to investors. So yes, is the short answer. We have done it, but there's more to do there.
Another point on that, Mark, just to throw in at the end, is that examples of sponsor reporting are a requirement at the time of deal screening. So I'd say in the last 18 months or so, every sponsor that's come through, I'd have to go back in memory to remember exactly when we implemented that. But I can tell you within the last year, every deal that has gotten approved, gone up on the marketplace, has done so after we've seen an example of reporting of one of their portfolio assets.
And on the fees as well, I know there's the one-time fee for listing, and depending on how much you raise. Are there yearly ongoing fees as well that they have to pay you, and are they coming out of the deal as well?
Yeah, that's correct, Mark. There are ongoing fees. We call those the annual solutions fees, but you can think about those, pay for a portion of asset performance and the technology, the software itself. And reporting is an obligation, right? It's not an option, it's an obligation. And, whether we hold them to a monthly webinar or encourage them to do a monthly webinar, or but we do enforce them or require them to do quarterly reporting through the technology, right? So that we can have accurate portfolios, right? It drives us crazy when sponsors are not reporting in a timely and accurate basis, because what we're trying to achieve very simply is statements that are accurate that you guys can rely on, right? And so hence the investment in the asset performance team. They do pay fees for that, and investors do not pay fees for that, but we still like to consider ourselves, not only the tech, but also the service and the professional services, the IR team, the asset performance team, right? The human resources involved with making sure that investors are well taken care of. And of course, the sponsors don't have to deal with hundreds of investors at a time, right? Many of them have IR teams, or they do have IR teams, they have accounting systems and so forth, but they're not necessarily ready for 250 new investors to sort of hit them directly. So they consider us a single point of contact. Those fees are based on also flat fees based upon a per individual investor basis. And it, call it, a couple, $300, $400 per investor per year. So as a percentage of the average ticket size, it's under a point, right? So it's called 75 bips plus, minus, sometimes lower.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as an investor, we see the 1% asset management fee, and we would hope that they would use that fee to cover, all their overhead. And is that considered overhead that they cover from their income, or is it passed through directly to investors? And it's hard to know going up front.
Well, it's also in the deal. So you would see that that would be part of the 1% asset management fee, whatever the asset management fee is. And our annual solutions fee is a part of that.
It's part of that, so it's not on top of that. That's what,
No, it's part of it.
Okay.
Not on top of it.
Okay. Well, that's if that was clear. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we assumed it was, but you just never know, and you can get feed to death on a lot of these deals, and that's always
Mark,
a concern.
Exactly.
Totally agree. And as a little point of clarification on that, remember that if you're seeing a 1 point fee in the deal, obviously we're just getting the 75 bips on the capital that we're contributing, right? And we're a piece of the equity stack. So the way that the sponsor views this is there's a lot of ongoing, investor reporting and work that needs to be done. We're, for the capital that we're a part of, we're very in it with the sponsor, both in terms of, all the things we just talked about, the webinars, the following up, kind of the communication that's going back to the investor. So, right, we're carving out our piece within inside of that overall fee. So if you think about it, like for the capital that's in our deal, there's maybe a little bit of a spread that they still get, but they're maybe giving us 75 out of that 100 basis points on our capital, while they're taking 100 basis points on their own capital.
All right. And is the CrowdStreet a profitable company? What is the cash on hand, burn rate, and et cetera? And do you expect to survive a recession?
We are not profitable yet. Cash on hand is enough to get us through. So as a reminder, we did an equity raise in November of 2019. And that amount is still sitting in our bank account. So given our current burn rate, given the current crisis, even without tapping additional capital, we have at least a 12-month run rate on capital, and then we have access to additional capital sources without doing an additional equity raise. The other thing I would point to is, as of yet, we have not done any furloughs, we've not done any layoffs. We're continuing to operate the marketplace just as we had beforehand. We have slowed down on hirings, and we have gotten more efficient on cost, but we are well positioned to survive this.
And have you raised any money through your own platform for yourself, or are you using traditional means?
Well, when we did the Series C raise in November, we did do that through the platform, and a significant amount of those investors were sponsors and investors on the platform.
What's a ballpark figure that you raised yourself versus using traditional means?
The Series C raised $12 million, and that was 75% sponsors and investors.
Oh, well. All right, and hey, it's 10 minutes after 2. It's always been over an hour. There's like 30 more questions. Do you want to keep going through this, or maybe do another webinar of just questions?
We should probably move toward wrapping it up. I know Santosh asked one question via the app itself, so I thought maybe we would end on that one. Okay. But what we could also do, because Santosh's question is really appropriate, we reached out to you guys as a formal, just verbal communication, right? And in addition to that, we're sending out investor surveys, right? And so Santosh asked, how do you poll investors for feedback on what our priorities should be, CrowdStreet's priorities, right? He said he sees a note on sponsor surveys. Why not do regular investor surveys, especially focus group surveys, to get specific feedback from seasoned and long-term investors? And I just absolutely, right? That's correct. We are sending out regular surveys to our investors, and we're trying to understand what you're looking for and what we can do for you during this time, whether that be asset performance and reporting, things like that, because we know one thing for sure. First order of business in this crisis is understand what your portfolio looks like, right? And then once you get a feeling of confidence with that, it might not be good news. There might be a bunch of bad news in that portfolio, right? Could be what we're experiencing as a globe, but at least understanding. And then from there, move toward, as America restarts and reopens, making investments again. CrowdStreet will absolutely be on the front lines. Once we talk about the humanitarian, the care and the health and safety of our loved ones and our team and the people and our nation, we start to think about, wow, we're going to start seeing some pretty interesting deal flow here, right? I mean, you bet we're going to be opportunistic. You bet we're going to be seeking distress and basis like we haven't seen before. Like many of us who lived through the Great Recession didn't think we'd get another shot at this. Right? We're not necessarily loving it because of all the pain that we're going to go through to get there, but CrowdStreet is strong going into this recession, and we are going to be identifying great opportunities. So we will be sending out surveys to you guys as a power group, as a 506 group, and then we're sending out surveys to the other 50,000 plus accredited investors that we have across the United States. So thank you for asking the question, and thanks for answering the next survey that comes through, or just feeding back to us on a regular basis.
Very good. Well, I guess just for the sake of time, we'll wrap this one up, and then we'll get together and maybe schedule another one next couple of weeks, and we'll probably have more questions and just do a Q&A one, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, Mark, that sounds great. And I know that other members were asking about how do you see hospitality or retail and so forth. I just last week we did the Wall Street Journal Nuveen webinar where we covered a lot of that. So just point some of your members to that. Maybe you could post it with anything else if you feel. Otherwise, we'll do another webinar in a couple of weeks. We'll have a ton of time for Q&A. We'll talk about different asset classes and geographies and where we see some of the opportunities moving forward if you think that's of interest.
Very good. Well, thank you for your time. It was very informative, and we look forward to doing it again.
We do as well. Thanks again, guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye.